Hey everyone, welcome to Plants and Politics. So a new 50-page Inspector General's report reveals that the Department of Homeland Security knew of intended violence on January 6th. Some of their own employees actually chose to stay home that day to avoid it, and yet they failed to share the information with anyone outside of the department. So here's the deal. DHS has a division known as the Intelligence and Analysis Division. That division is supposed to assess threats and then disseminate those threats and information to other parties of interest, like state and local law enforcement. According to the Inspector General's report, they knew in advance of the Capitol attack that maps of the Capitol were being shared online. They knew that Trump supporters were openly talking about murdering counter-protesters and Democratic lawmakers. That's something we've heard before based on other parallel investigations into these security failures. What we haven't heard before is how employees of this agency, people who are tasked with keeping all of us and our nation safe, were mocking the idea, basically, of murdering Democrats. We also didn't know that these same people believed that the threats were so credible that they took steps to protect themselves. They were warning each other to take extra precautions in traveling to and from work, and some of them chose to take the day off. That they just wanted to avoid the area entirely. Yet they left everyone else to fend for themselves, including the intended targets of this violence. So the Inspector General report concluded that they chose to keep this information within their agency for two key reasons. One was that they claimed they didn't want to face public backlash. We've heard that before too, right? They said, based on what happened last summer and their violations of the First Amendment. Let's be clear, they violated people's First Amendment rights during the George Floyd protests. The second reason that the IG determined that they kept this all secret was because the Trump administration rushed through the hiring process in 2019, and that resulted in inexperienced and untrained employees. Apparently, there was like this mass exodus. Many intelligence and analysis employees quit in 2019. So the IG found that the department went on a hiring spree. But the IG says that the new employees were, quote, mostly at entry-level positions, with many not having federal government or intelligence experience. As of January 6, 2021, 16 out of 21 collectors had less than 1 year of experience. And some of these new collectors said they did not receive adequate training to help determine when threat information should be reported. I mean, are we surprised at this point? This was par for the course. Golf pun totally intended, by the way. This was par for the course with Trump and his team of morons. All the best people, right? So in regard to the first issue, they obviously had no problem violating the First Amendment rights of protesters who were asking that the police maybe not shoot unarmed people of color, right? They also had no problem violating the rights of the press, freedom of the press. The Intercept pointed out in an article, quote, in the summer of 2020, INA, which is that department, was embroiled in controversy when documents leaked showing that analysts had created files on journalists covering the George Floyd protests. Soon after that, Brian Murphy, the head of INA at the time, filed a whistleblower complaint alleging that two top officials at DHS pressured his analysts to downplay intelligence, downplay intelligence involving threats from the far right, and to amplify intelligence supporting the president's re-election messaging on the dangerousness of left-wing agitators. The DHS political appointees in question, Chad Wolf and Ken Cuccinelli, denied the allegation. And when the IG interviewed employees of this department or this division within the department, the employees told the IG that during the racial justice protests, so during the George Floyd protests in the summer of 2020, they were basically given free rein. They were allowed to collect information on anyone and everyone, peaceful protesters, journalists, whoever you wanted. Go ahead, go for it. But they said that in the weeks and months leading up to January 6th, there was a, quote, pendulum swing. The IG report says, quote, they explained that they thought almost anything was reportable during the Portland protests, but they were hesitant or fearful to report information related to January 6 events. One collector said people were afraid to do their jobs because of the fear of being reprimanded by INA leadership and concerns about congressional scrutiny. Another explained there was a chilling effect on their approach to reporting following the summer of 2020. Really? Was there a chilling effect? Or was it maybe that, there was a difference in these two groups? All of a sudden, leadership instructs them to stop reporting threats? Really? So here's some more of what the IG report detailed. On January 2nd, two employees who were responsible for collecting this data and identifying threats and then reporting it, they were exchanging messages and just with each other, and they were voicing their concerns. So one employee mentioned that people were sharing the map of the Capitol online, and they wrote to the second employee, quote, I feel like people are actually going to try and hurt politicians. January 6th is going to be crazy, not to mention the inauguration. The second employee expressed similar concerns and then noted that the Proud Boys had been in town the night before. Several hours later, the first employee sends another message to the second employee and says, quote, like there's these people talking about hanging Democrats from ropes, like WTF. The second employee responds with, quote, they need a lot of rope. I think DC is pretty much all Democrat, ha ha. Later that night, the first employee sends another message, which read, quote, I mean, people are talking about storming Congress, bringing guns, willing to die for the cause, hanging politicians with ropes. The IG's report says neither of these two employees even considered filing a report about these findings. The report states, quote, when reviewing threats pertaining to January 6 events, the collectors generally concluded that the statements online were hyperbole and not true threats or incitement because they thought storming the U.S. Capitol and other threats were unlikely or not possible. Seriously? So because you perceive a threat to be impossible to carry out, you just don't report it. Let's just say for shits and giggles that some brown people were making these same comments and threats. Would they have found it impossible then? Would they have found it impossible for the Capitol to be breached if these were people of color making these threats? If these people, let's say, had Middle Eastern sounding last names, would they have remained quiet about that? No, I almost guarantee it. And no one's going to change my mind about that. This is a perfect example of inherent bias. You will never convince me that this data wasn't ignored simply because these were predominantly white people who supported Trump. And leave it to Trump's people, Trump's administration, to half-ass everything. And to not even bother to train these people, to not even bother to train people who are literally tasked with keeping us all safe. Like I said, par for the course with Trump and his administration. half-ass everything, don't train people, don't tell them what they're supposed to be looking for. And then you've got people with this inherent bias who, oh, no, this is all bluster. This is all hyperbole. They literally said, I feel like people are going to try to hurt lawmakers. And then they did nothing. Unfreaking believable. I hope they've all been fired. Anyway, guys, if I hear any more, I'll let you know. Thanks so much for watching and listening. Take care. I'll talk with you soon.